our first Sunday, we walked across the muddy lawn area on planks.
Yes?
Yep, the parking lot of course, wasn't completed because it was their very first Sunday in that new church building. In fact, when I had called from the Yellow Pages and said, you know, to give me the address of your church because it wasn't in the Yellow Pages, they gave me the address for Bellevue School. And then went, no, we're going to be meeting in our new building this week. So we were actually there for the very first Sunday in the new building.
And that new building is what we now call the Schultz Fellowship Hall?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
How did you hear about that church?
Looked in the Yellow Pages for the closest one.
Did it?
We had just moved to the Denver area, and we were looking for, well, to the Aurora area, and we were looking for a Methodist church, and so we went to the Yellow Pages to look.
And there it was.
There it was.
Well, you remember the parking lot wasn't in a very good shape. What was the church like when you attended?
It was, well, fresh and brand spanking new, and smelled like fresh paint and carpet, and all the chairs were, you know.
7 chairs.
Yeah, didn't have any pews.
No
Oh,
pews.
no,
Yeah.
not in that one. Not in that building.
Yeah.
I don't remember that was even an issue for us because we knew it was a new church. And the one thing I remember, and I don't remember if it was there then or it came later, was the stained glass cross
Yes.
that hung up on the wall.
On the west
and
wall?
I don't remember if it was there then, but it was the most interesting cross adornment that I had ever seen. And I've been a Methodist for most of my life, and I have been in many, many churches because my first husband was a Methodist pastor.
I see.
And so we went, you know, as student pastors, we went from, you know, church to church. Every year we had a different church, or 2 or 3.
Yes.
So that wasn't new kind of behavior for me to see that, but
Yeah.
the stained glass cross was interesting.
Yeah.
I know it was a labor of love for the guy that made it,
Yes.
but it was a labor of controversy for the people.
Well, as I recall it lit up. It
Oh, yeah.
turned
Oh,
the
yeah.
light on
Oh, yeah.
inside.
It had,
Yeah.
There was a lot of controversy. Some people liked it, some people did not like it at all.
Yeah.
And
but
they
we had
wanted
it for a long time.
Oh, yes.
Well, that first Sunday, did they have a choir and
You
regular
know, I
service?
don't remember. I was
remember.
trying to remember if they had a choir, but I'm thinking maybe that they did have a few voices, either that Sunday or shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
But I know we had some kind of special music.
Yeah.
I just don't remember what it was. Played the piano, no organ, of course.
Sure. Well, Al Brown was the pastor at that time. Do you remember Al?
Oh,
Oh, yes.
yes, we
Tell me
remember
what you
that.
remember about him.
Oh, Al was a good old boy, you know. I'm from Texas and he was from Oklahoma. And he was a good old boy. I
Smoked a pipe.
smoked pipe, and he was, he had spaghetti dinners for new members. Served spaghetti dinners in his home, he did. One of the things a couple of things that I remember that are maybe not the most positive things, but one of them was that having been a preacher's wife in small churches, I was kind of surprised that his family was not always at church. We didn't have those kind of freedoms in the South.
Yes, yes.
We didn't have that kind of personal choice, I guess, or whatever it was. And so it was a new experience for me, and to not always have the preacher's wife there every Sunday. But then one Sunday she called and said she had missed us, that we weren't there. So that was kind of, that also was a new experience.
And you're talking about Laura Brown.
Yes,
Yeah,
Laura,
Laura.
yeah. Loved Laura. She was a sweetheart. And the other thing that sticks out in my mind about Al Brown is that he had tickets to the Bronco games. And so sometimes, if the game was early, he would ask someone else to do the benediction, and he would leave
So he could get
so he could
The
get to the game on time. And I don't know why that sticks in my mind. So interesting, but it was.
Well, Victor Schultz was also the associate pastor
Oh,
and
yeah.
the membership pastor, I believe, at that time. Do you remember Victor?
Oh, of
Oh,
course.
yes.
Oh, of course. Victor called on everybody who visited the church, and he He was the old-fashioned preacher,
Yes.
and I think probably the most loved preacher that we had. I had made a couple of notes on Victor, that he was, absolutely everybody loved Victor and Ruth. They were a team, and people would, I think, as Victor's style of ministry moved away and became not the style of new ministers that came in, people were really disappointed. They expected to be visited by the pastor, and so a lot of old-fashioned expectations, I would call them old-fashioned expectations. But the new pastors coming in, they were into the new way of doing things, and so
Sure.
we all had to adjust to that kind of thing. But I was really glad when they named the fellowship hall the Victor Schultz,
Me too.
because
Yeah.
I think it was a grounding for our church, the beginning of the kind of fellowship that we still have, and holding hands, and the whole piece of feeling a part of a family. I think that started with Victor.
He came to visit me after I had visited, and I was too embarrassed to put my home address, so I put my office address, thinking he wouldn't come to a business to visit. And the next Wednesday he was at my office.
Well, that's Victor.
And he convinced me that'd be a good thing for me, and he was right.
Yeah. Well, and it was a good thing for us too, Charlie, in the
Yeah.
long run.
I think so. Well, you remember the basement used to flood? They had all
Oh,
kinds
yeah.
of problems with that
Oh,
building.
Oh, yes.
Yep, Ed was the trustee. He was on trustees.
And you're right in the middle of that.
And then, well, starting what you were in the middle of was he and Jack Wilson.
Yes?
Go ahead.
Well, between Jack and I, we put in the original irrigation system.
Okay.
Came home up to their knees in mud from digging to put in the pipes and everything for the sprinkler system for the church. Because in those days, you didn't hire that stuff done, you did it yourself.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I remember Sylvia Postlethwaite emptying wastebaskets all around the church. But things had to be done, and
Yeah.
people did them.
Oh.
Carol
Well-
Burton went to Sunday school, and
I remember Carol coming up to the main service and saying, "We need some teachers. We don't have enough teachers for the kids that we have, and if you don't come and help me, we're not going to have one." And 2 or 3 people got up from the service to go down and help her run the Sunday school.
now that doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me that Carol would do that.
She was very firm about it.
Well, she didn't have a whole awful lot of choice.
Well, you get your kids back in church with you if you don't come down and help
I
them
think
Sunday
that's right.
school.
That's right.
But just the foundation of the church, the people that were part of the foundation of the church. And I don't remember in what order they came, but you know, Peggy Hansen, isn't the kitchen called the Peggy Hansen Memorial Kitchen?
If it's not,
know?
it should be.
Yeah. And that tiny little kitchen that we had, which is where the elevator is now. And we would have potlucks, and we'd be tables all set up and down the hallway. And I remember Mary Lou Culpepper's iron skillet apple pie.
Ooh.
She was the sweetest lady. She was the sweetest lady.
Well, some of those original members that met in that fellowship hall formed a very tight bond. You have friends even today that you met at that time?
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. And well, most of them are like us. They're either moving on or they've already moved on.
Sure.
But yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Dick and Peggy and some people that aren't there anymore. And I was trying to think of a couple of names, and I know I really embarrassed myself one time because my first husband was bald, and so I never realized that some people were very sensitive about being bald. I'm sorry. Just turn that off.
Turn it off and that'll help.
That's no
But
problem.
anyway, though,
The halls.
the Halls. Oh, gee, Shirley Hall used to be my nemesis. Oh my goodness. When I was chairman of staff parish relations committee, she would call me at 10, 11 o'clock at night and just yell at me about stuff. And then I just made it my mission to become her friend. And now we're really good friends.
Good for you.
And I don't know that she even remembers, but I remember Peggy Hansen was on my committee, and she said, I was complaining, and she said to me, now, Ann, you just need to be nice to her. And I said, no, I don't.
Well, tell me some of the offices and roles that you've played at the church. You mentioned the SPRC,
Yeah.
and Ed was on the trustees at one time.
Right. I was chairman when we built the new sanctuary. And that was a challenge.
That was quite an undertaking.
But prior to that, it was just getting a parking lot taken care of. We had people cutting a corner and driving across our
really?
lawn. They cut the intersection, they go across our lawn. We had somebody get stuck in the lawn and think that the church ought to pay for getting him unstuck.
Oh my goodness.
Ed used to get so frustrated with people's expectations, people who weren't members of the church.
Yeah.
But, you know, they'd cut through because the traffic would be so bad on Bellevue, that intersection, Bellevue and Dayton. And he'd come home and he'd be so when they finally built the fence,
Mm-hmm.
they named it the Ed Mangelsen Honorary Fence.
Good idea.
You know, we had power poles laid across on our property line, and the people would come out and move them so they could cut across.
My goodness.
And we had one time we had somebody doing cartwheels in the parking lot and they ran into one of the light poles and thought the church ought to pay for fixing his car.
Oh, sure. Well, some of the early photographs in the church records show a barn over there where the Jewish synagogue is. That whole area was pretty undeveloped
Yeah.
at that time, so it was sort of the edge of town.
Well, and at one point, the church even considered purchasing that place that is now there, the home and the barn that are
Yes.
south of the
Yeah.
isn't it? South of
Yeah.
of the synagogue. We considered that for Sunday school rooms, and you know, as you look at what options there are
Sure.
and economics, but it was so very difficult to build anything in Greenwood Village if you were a church. And we thought that, you know, having Dave Hull as the mayor was going to be a little bit of help. It was not.
That's right. Well, we got into the brouhaha with them over the Memorial Garden also.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Greenwood
yes.
Village didn't really want that.
They didn't want a cemetery in there,
No.
but they have learned to live with it.
Yes.
It doesn't look much like a cemetery, does it?
No.
And I remember the O'Connells. She used to say all the time, I'm going to have my, what was their daughter's name? Dana or Diane? Anyway, she said, we're going to have her wedding out there in the Memorial Garden. just to show the neighbors that it's not just a...
Yes.
There was a fountain put in that you could see from the street, the top of the fountain. We had to move it off of the center
Yeah.
pedestal.
Yeah, the city was very particular about everything that
Well,
was around it.
it was not only just the city, but some of the neighbors.
Yes, a lot of the neighbors. Well, after we outgrew the fellowship hall, you were part of building the new sanctuary. Tell us how that came about.
Well, it was the 40-year-old people decided that we needed a sanctuary, and there was a building committee. I was kind of standing back watching things happen. I'm trying to think of the guy's name who actually was the interface between the contractor and the church.
Well, Chris Brooks was later when we
Oh,
did the expansion, but
yeah.
what you're talking about is what was it?
Prior to that,
Yeah.
Ron Skarka.
Yeah, and he's still around, and he's been
Yes.
very active in helping with the land.
That's right. That's right. He's familiar with that plan development and working with the city agencies.
But he was the interface, and just reported back to me and the committee what was happening.
Yeah. Now, what about the money? How did we get the money to do that?
I don't recall.
Yeah, I don't know either of them, except didn't we borrow it from
Borrowed it from the conference.
the national, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. The United Methodist Development Fund or something
Yeah.
was the original one.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's usually the way that new churches are funded,
Yeah.
pretty much.
There were
Or
times that we had to make a choice of whose bill we were going to pay.
Yes.
Oh gosh, when I was on the finance committee, we had a couple of people. I can remember one night there was a family, and I don't even remember the name, but it's not that important. But they had moved away and they moved back, and he wanted on the finance committee. And Clay Hill was the chairman of the finance committee. I loved being on committees with Clay Hill and Chris Brooks and those guys. They were just young bucks who were just, raring to go. And this guy was a very conservative guy, huh?
Dick Parker.
Dick Parker. And he started out in this meeting, well, we can't do this, or we'll get the lights turned off, or we'll get... So this went on for the whole meeting. So we're going back out, and I'm going to my car, and Clay walks over to my car, and he says to me, who was that guy? So I kind of told him, a little bit of the history, and he's like, this is not good. Because, Clay was always the hail fellow, well met, good,
Yes.
Everything's going to be okay kind of person.
We're going to make it work.
Yes.
But the years that I was on there were years when we didn't know whether we were going to pay the light bill or if we were going to pay the mortgage. It really got tight there for a lot of different times.
Yes.
And when Sam Day came to the church, he said to me, and first of all, Charlie, you have to understand, first of all, Dick Parker didn't like me because I wouldn't take my turn to count.
Uh-oh.
But I'm dyslexic with numbers, and I knew I couldn't count because the numbers would never come out. So I said, well, I can't do the counting, but I'll be the secretary. So I was the secretary, and they all loved that because none of these numbers people wanted to be the secretary.
Sure.
So when Sam came to the church, he said to me, he was looking at all of them, he said, how long have you been on the finance committee? I said, my entire life, I think. But I was chairman of the SPRC, and I quit that job in midterm because I was in Al's office, Al Brown's office, and we were discussing salaries for that night's meeting. And there was a knock at the door, and it was Dave Hall. Now, I've always had my own business and worked for myself. I consider myself a professional. Al was sort of like not into women, especially strong women, very much. Even though he had Laura, I think he thought one of those in his life was enough. and because at one point, I'm going to sidetrack here, but at one point we were interviewing for a new associate, and the choice was between a very strong woman and one with some political views that I don't think that Al agreed with, and was outspoken, and John Laughlin, and he chose John Laughlin. But he told me, he said, I do not want her. I do not want her. You figure out how we're gonna say no to her. So I picked up pretty quick. But anyway, there was a knock at the door that night, or that afternoon, and it was Dave Hall. And he got up and opened the door, and he said to me, well, now Dave Hall is a very important businessman, and he's very busy, so we're going to have to continue this. We're going to have to discontinue this conversation. And I'm thinking, I said, Al, I don't have any more time today to work on this. Well, I'm sorry, but Dave takes priority. And so I got up and I left, and I wrote a letter of resignation, and I handed it to him at the meeting that night and said, I can't work this way. And I don't think he was disappointed because he didn't like working with strong women anyway.
Yeah. Well, as we were going through that, Al Brown was part of that expansion to build the new congregational Sanctuary, thank you. And Dr. Victory came in, Richard Vickery, about that same time. And we had some ups and downs financially. Do you remember things about Dr. Vickery?
I remember Dr. Vickery. First of all, I kind of have liked all of the pastors that we've had. Not saying that we ran through a period of time at Hope when we were the death knell for associates. We could get rid of associates faster than they could get their shirt tails in the door. And we had one during Al's tenure that was pretty controversial. I mean, we've had several through the years, but we had one that was pretty controversial. And so then when he was instrumental in helping to get Al moved to Evergreen. And then we got Dr. Vickery. And a lot of people were off-put, I want to say off-put rather than put off, by Dick because he was so formal.
Yes.
And he called himself a penguin, that was his nickname for himself. But I loved his sermons. I thought they were intense. I thought they were well thought out. I thought they were organized. I thought they were spiritual. But I knew that I was in the minority with a lot of people because of personality issues. And this church does tend to put an awful lot of stock in the pastor's personality.
Yes.
And how that personality fits with their own personal decisions about how things ought to be.
Yeah, and that
So-
formality was very different from Al Brown's personality.
Oh, yes,
absolutely.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. And there were lots of rumors because of his change from where he was and things that had been said. And the fact that he was divorced was an issue for some of the people. And so that was it. But the heartbreaking thing for me was that they told him that they were not going to ask to have him return to Hope on his 50th birthday, and he didn't know it was coming. So that was kind of sad from my perspective.
Yeah.
But then he found a home in Evergreen, and that, as usually happens, that worked out for him.
Well, after Dr. Vickery, you mentioned Sam Day. Sam
Oh,
Day
yeah.
came as the senior pastor. You remember him?
Yeah, well, Sam Day was our pastor that was the second most popular pastor we've ever had, and that was second only to Victor Schultz.
Yes.
Well, and maybe the interim pastor, Dale.
Dale Beck.
Dale Beck,
yes.
yeah. People loved him too. But then he didn't stay long enough to get in trouble.
Yes.
So.
He was there for a transition. That's
Yeah,
right.
And he could say what he needed to say
Yes.
and not have to worry about what people thought about it. But he had a way of saying it that it didn't really offend people.
So,
But no, Sam Day, what can you say about Sam Day? That hasn't been said by everybody that's ever worked with him.
you remember him, Ed?
oh yes. He was fun to work with. Because he was down to earth type of person, and you always knew where he stood.
Yeah.
That's what some people say about me. Don't say much, but
I'm going to back up for just a second to Al Brown because I just remembered an incident with you and Al Brown. Ed was working out at Henderson, you know where that is up north of
Yes.
Denver? Okay. And Millie, who was the secretary, called Ed one day, and the furnace pilot light had gone out at the church, and because he was chairman of the trustees, she said he needed to come and light the furnace for the church. And Al said, "That's not my job. I'm not doing that."
well, that along with scattering de-icer on the sidewalk.
Oh, really?
He
Yeah.
thought I should come in from my job, which was 50 miles away,
Yes.
and scatter de-icer on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
There was some growing pains.
Yes.
There was some growing
Like
pains.
any family.
As people got their perspectives of what, I think as pastors got a perspective, because in small churches, they do those things. You know, if one person shows up for church, you preach the sermon.
That's right.
And as the cowboy said, you give them, they don't usually give me, I don't give the load of cattle the whole pickup load of hay, but anyway. Anyway, though,
Well, after Sam Day, we get back to your point about the female pastors. Margaret Rush Hankins came.
and at the time that we were doing that transition, I wrote a letter to Bishop Eno. And I said to him, you know, Hope Church is a wonderful church and it's a close church, but it's a church that's full of chiefs and not a lot of Indians.
I've heard that remark.
And I would like to see us have a pastor who can deal with those kinds of issues, and perhaps another district superintendent falling in right behind Sam is not the best way to go. Well, you can see how well he listened to me. But I knew Margaret because she and I had connected because we were both in the North Texas Conference at the same time. I didn't know her there, but we had connected with that connection. And as she would preach as a DS and be in and out of the church occasionally as a DS. So I wasn't disappointed that we got Margaret.
No.
And Margaret and I are, I think, I would consider her a very dear, close friend. But at the time, I wasn't sure she was strong enough to deal, and then she had some health issues, which is part of why they did the part-time thing.
Yeah.
But I just wasn't sure she was quite strong enough to deal with some of the more, I don't know, executive types that we had that again were like, they were looking for people to do the task, and
Yeah.
they were going to be the administrators.
Yes.
So there were a lot of growing pains
Yeah.
over the years.
Well, that joint part you mentioned was with John Lee. That Margaret and John Lee served as co-pastors for a period of time. And Margaret, in my opinion, was very good at kind of smoothing that
Yes.
over because she was in a tough position.
She was, and he didn't take him, as I've heard him say, about 15 minutes to figure out that wasn't the type of ministry that he had really wanted.
Yes.
But he had been willing to try it.
Yeah.
And so when it was time, and he felt he'd stayed long enough, he was certainly ready to go and do what he felt his gifts and graces were.
Yes. Yeah.
But I agree. I think Margaret is a peacemaker. I mean, I think she can be a very good peacemaker, and I think she has a loving spirit, and she has a kind-hearted spirit for the people.
Mm-hmm. Well, she and Jim have both been stalwart members, and I was so pleased they came back to be members of our church because, as you know, that's unusual for former pastors.
It's not allowed.
Yeah, you don't do that.
I was glad she was allowed to come back.
Yeah.
That took a couple of our really strong administrative executive types
Yes.
in the bishop's office to make that happen. But I think our church has certainly benefited from that, and they handled that well. They stayed away for the year required, and when they came back, you know, she didn't. There are lots of rules, like a former pastor can't come back and do. You think they choose not to, but part of it is that they're not allowed to come back into the church and do weddings and funerals. Those are the things that bond people to their pastors.
Yes.
And if they are usurped by a former pastor, and we lived with some of that in our early days, you never have an opportunity to really bond.
Yeah.
But I didn't know John Lee that well. A lot of people got to know him more than I did. He came to call on me when my mother died, and that was a good visit.
Yeah.
But other than that, we really weren't involved in the things that John was
Yeah.
active with.
Well, after this, Steve Miller came and worked with Margaret for a period of time. Do you remember Steve Miller?
Charlie, I remember all the pastors, because most of them I have taken to lunch more than once,
Sure.
or had lunch with. And
Sure.
Steve Miller and I had regular lunch dates. And because pastors need sometimes somebody that they can be open with, that know both sides of the story and have sat on both sides of the table.
Yes.
And so that's how I saw my role with some of the pastors. And one of them was Steve Miller.
Yeah.
And he was so excited to be able to come to Colorado, but he wasn't prepared for a church like Hope.
Yeah.
and I think he and Margaret did okay with their co-pastorate, but I think he was, when it came time for him to do it on his own, it was just bigger than
It was bigger than
the mountains for him.
And he had issues, I think, with his children and family, and as we all do, that
Right.
made a difficult time in his life.
Well, his daughter worked for me.
Did she?
Yep,
Yeah.
she did. She came in one day and she told me she was going to get a tattoo, and I'm thinking, the preacher's kid's getting a tattoo. This is interesting. She's going into this big drama. She was a drama queen.
Yes.
She did all this drama. You had her in Sunday school,
Yes.
so you know. She had all this drama about this tattoo, and she was going to her friend's house, and her friend was going to take care of her, and all this. And so that's on Friday. So on Monday she shows up with green hair and no tattoo. And I'm on the phone to California, and I'm like, to my corporate, and I'm like, excuse me just a second. Emma, your hair is green. She said, I know. And the lady on the other end starts laughing, and I said, she's 16. And she said, oh. And she starts laughing, and I said, I think I need to go find out what's going on. Well, then she had all this drama. She lost her ID. I said, you lost your driver's license? Yeah, and I could have taken my mom, but, and she went through this whole thing of, why she couldn't have a tattoo, so she decided to dye her hair green. And so that was, that was fun. So I had Emma, and I'm glad you can appreciate Emma,
Yes.
too. But Steve and I would go to lunch, and he was able to vent and to express his own feelings of inadequacy and his frustrations with people, and the way some of the people that he was working with, that young woman that was so difficult, that was on our staff at one time, Children's Ministries or something. Don't remember her name. Isn't important. And then another associate that was an issue, and he just wanted to be a pastor.
Yes.
He just wanted to be a small church pastor. Love the people, sing the songs. He had a beautiful voice. Sing the songs, and just have everybody be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Yeah.
That's right.
And Hope Church was not the place for that to happen.
That wasn't going to happen.
Well, after Steve Miller, we had Steve Warren came for several years. You remember Steve Warren?
Oh, Steve Warren with the unusual personality. Yeah, I do. And again, Steve Warren and I used to go to lunch together. And Steve wasn't quite as open about, conflicts and stuff, other than the fact that his wife wasn't happy at Hope. And that's always sad, because it's difficult to pastor if your wife is. But she did get involved, and she did do things. I don't know.
Yeah.
But even after they left, we saw them a couple of times. But Steve and I were buddies. But I told him at one point, I said, Steve, you have the weirdest sense of humor, and it's going to walk you into the biggest pots of mud you ever saw if you don't learn to control your tongue. It didn't help.
Yeah.
He wasn't listening to me either. The lady that got so mad because one Sunday, she said during prayer time, request, please, pray for my husband because he's having a hip replacement. And Steve made the offhand comment. He said, well, yeah, and he's just an old hippie anyway. And the whole section of little old widow ladies, their hair all stood on end because they thought he was so disrespectful.
Yeah.
And I asked him one time, he was a defense attorney in a church trial that was held here in Conference. And I asked him, I said, so can you tell me what it's about? I knew it wasn't my business, but I just was curious. And he said, well, he just has a sense of humor that gets him in trouble all the time. And about that time, somebody walked by and said something to him, and he snapped off at him. And I said, speaking of sense of humor that gets people in trouble, Steve. But yeah, he just couldn't quite get that balance.
No. Well, after Steve Warren.
Well, I want to go back
Can you
to
say
Steve Warren.
Okay.
I want to say that I felt that Steve Warren was a very spiritual man, and I'm not sure that ever came through to a lot of people at Hope. but I felt that his spirituality was such a key part and an in-depth part of who he was, and that he lost the ability to or interfered with his own ability to have people see that side of him with his unusual form of wit.
Yep.
But knowing him as I did, I saw him as a very spiritual man.
Well, you've been a blessing to many of these pastors just by providing them with a sounding board or a little background about the personalities at Hope.
Well, I hope so. That was my wish, was that I could be used in some way that would help them, because being a pastor is not an easy task.
No.
So I interrupted you. So
We were just going to say the current pastor, Don Bird.
oh, now talk about spiritual. That man is spiritual, as is Pastor Stephanie.
Yes, she's a gem.
Those are the most deeply spiritual. But I also feel that because when they came to Hope, things were not so roiled, so up in the air.
Yes.
I used to say, we were wading through raging seas while the Scripture was promising us that we would be led beside still waters.
Yes.
And that the church had so many years of so much, and I don't know that Dale Beck was the exclusive creator of that, but it certainly helped to have that 1 year of time when we were not in constant conflict about things.
Yeah.
It was them against us type situation going on in the church all the time. And that was bad news.
Yeah, Clay Hill and I, at one point, went to a church member that had been strong leadership church person who was going around talking to people and doing undercurrent, trying to be disruptive. And Clay and I took him to breakfast, and some of my background is conflict resolution with nonprofits. That's one of the things that I did as a volunteer, trained as a volunteer. And so we went and met with this person and and basically what I had said to him was, if Hope is not meeting your faith walk journey as you see it, then perhaps what you need to do is find a place that is more consistent with your belief system. And that's maybe a little kinder way of saying go away and leave us alone.
The door opens both ways.
Yes.
And this family did leave for a while, but they came back. And he said to me, "I'm glad you told me that. I needed to see what else was out there." But it was just to the point where, only one other time did I ever think, well, only one time since I've been at Hope did I think, I cannot deal with this anymore, I'm leaving. I didn't, obviously, but
Sure.
it was just too
Well,
much.
both of you experienced tremendous growth and then diminution of the membership. Finances are fine. Finances are very tight. Personality conflicts. What kept you loyal to this church?
It became our home.
Church home.
It's a Hope Church is, well, look what we've been through in the last 2 to 3 years with grandchildren and their terrible injuries and this cancer that I'm dealing with and Ed's Parkinson that he's dealing with. If it were not for Hope Church, I don't know where we'd be, because this family has surrounded us. I get mail every day from somebody at Hope. And I haven't even been darkened the door of the church since the first Sunday of December. And this is the middle of February. And we used to have almost perfect attendance at the church. So this is a family, and we feel the love and the caring and the support that you should feel from a family.
Yes. Well, we talked about a little bit already, and that kind of leads me to my next question: is what do you really like about Hope? And maybe you just said it.
I don't think there's anything that I could say that would be
No.
any different.
I always look forward to mingling with the people after the church service. Sunday school class was always interesting, I guess is the right way to put it. It's called Bible Basics, but we didn't talk, that wasn't the whole scheme of the class.
Yes.
We've been involved in an adult Sunday school class ever since we came. And the current class is made up of conservative people from conservative backgrounds, Pentecostals, Nazarenes, Methodists, Catholics. I mean, it's just a hodgepodge. And so the discussions that we have, even though we are studying like the book of John or we're studying something like that,
Right.
the discussions that come up are so much more intense, and we laugh and we joke and we, and we speak to our own spirituality and our own positions on things. And I'm a lumpy Christian. I've always been a lumpy Christian. And a lumpy Christian for me is someone who has conservative lumps and is a liberal, or is a conservative with liberal lumps, depending on the moment.
Sure.
So I just love that, getting right into the middle of all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But we talked about just a little bit about the things we had done at Hope. Stewardship committee, both of us. Finance committee, both of us. SPRC, me, trustees, him. And I was going to look to see if I missed anything, but I don't think so. I did not. I'm not a kitchen person. I'm not a kitchen person here. I'm not a kitchen person at the church. I love my Peggy Hansen and my Brenda Wright because
Yes.
because every church needs that.
They have those talents.
But I think you have to bring your gifts and graces and put them down where you can.
Yep.
But
Well, we've talked a lot about your involvement at Hope Church. Do you have a favorite memory that you could tell us about?
When they dedicated the sanctuary.
yeah.
That was a great day.
And for me, when two of our grandchildren were baptized there, and they were both baptized in the fellowship hall because it was before
Yes.
the sanctuary, and so it was, and then our daughters married there, so those are the things that are kind of my favorite memories.
Sure.
I started to mention earlier, and then the phone went off, but the bald fellow at the church that I said, I also did a clown ministry for a period of time too, and so here I am with my bright pink wig and my makeup and everything, and this fellow walks in, and I patted him on top of his bald head and said, "You want to borrow my hair?" Well, that was an inappropriate action and question, and I knew that the minute it left my mouth. So I've stumbled over my feet and my tongue a few times too. But just to me, communion Sundays. I miss the communion Sundays. I miss being a part of the whole fellowship. I mean, Stephanie brings communion to us, but
Yes.
it's still, I miss that.
Oh.
And I have taken communion to people and who are shut-ins, and that's a meaningful piece for me too.
Yes. Well, we talked a lot about your involvement at Hope and things it's achieved and some of its difficulties. What would you like to see Hope achieve in the next, say, 40 years?
I wrote that down.
Oh, good.
We talked about it. And
We did. We talked about it a lot, and let's see. That what I want to see, what I want to see Hope do is continue to be the church on the corner that makes an impact on the community at large, to continue to provide for the community the opportunity for spiritual renewal, for the children to learn and continue to learn, because the PDO program is so critical.
Yes.
And for the children, and especially because it's not all Hope kids.
Yes.
And it gives the opportunity for people to experience what a church can be without feeling churched
Yeah.
or pressured to follow certain dogmas or that sort of thing.
All ages.
All ages. It reaches out. Our church reaches out to all ages. I want to see it continue to do that. We're unique in the Methodist system right now because we have so many young people
Mm-hmm.
and so many children, and I'd like to see that continue. And I want to see Hope continue its missions. This church is such a mission-oriented
Yes.
church, and people don't even realize that about it because it just seems natural to them to feed the homeless and to send their youth off on mission trips.
The,
And
the list of mission things that we do is very long.
And I agree with Ann, a lot of people don't realize that or know about that.
well, even though they see the programs, they don't realize how mission-oriented Hope is.
Yeah.
So I like to see that continue and expand, because we have adults that go to Kenya. How old was Ann when she went the last time? 91 or 2 years old.
That's
I
right.
think she'd be happy if she died there, actually.
Yeah.
But that seems to be, and we build the mission from the youngest age. That's what's so exciting
think
to
so.
me. Even the little ones do mission projects.
They get involved and help and
Yeah,
understand that's part of it.
and their families are involved, and they see beyond themselves. So that's what I would want to see.
Well, we talked about a lot of people and different things. Anything we left out or other memories you could tell us about?
No, I think, that some of the people that impacted us were Jack Wilson
Yes.
and Harvey Triple and Mary Lou Culpepper and Dick and Peggy Hansen. We talked about all of those.
Yes.
There are many, many others. I hate to just pick out names, but those people are the people that, and Nancy Duncan,
Yes.
Can't imagine Hope without Nancy Duncan there.
I know.
Yeah, Jack and Harvey were cohorts with me putting in the sprinkler system and
Yes.
fixing the drainage and repairing things in the church. There are many others, of course,
Yes.
but as we were looking at that, those two names came to mind. Of course, Jack is gone, and Harvey is, I don't know where they are right now.
Yeah.
But you had asked me what Hope, and I had written this down. Hope is family in the best sense of the word. It is a centering place to walk your spiritual journey. It is a place of encouragement, comfort, belonging. It is our church home.
Well said.
So,
I do a lot of listening.
That's not all bad, Ed. It's all good. Well, I want to thank you for sitting with me for a few minutes and talk about your memories and your involvement with Hope, because you have certainly been stalwart and faithful members of that community of faith.
well, and I want to thank you for all you have done with the young people over the years.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Because you've made a huge difference. They listen to you, and they trust you. And to have that consistency, I think, is so critical.
Thank you.
As a small children started interfacing with you all the way up through their adulthood.
Well, it warmed my heart. Just one example that Brent and Carrie Moats baptized their child in the church, and I had seen them baptized in that church, and then through the youth program, and now to come back as adults starting their own family. It's just the way it should work.
Yes, yes, yeah.
That's
And
what-
you've walked these kids through losses,
Yes.
and they've seen how a Christian walks through times. And at such an emotional age, they need that.
Yes.
They need that.
I think so.
But thank you for honoring us by allowing us to be a
Yeah.
part of this.
This has been my pleasure. This will be a treasure for the history of the church. I want to thank you again.